Duncan, could you tell us a little about the Rugby League achievements, or the most notable achievements of the Toowoomba Rugby League in the early years?
The early years will go back, of course, to the 1920s, Bob. They are noted for our undefeated record when we had the distinction of playing for 2 years against all places in which Rugby League was playing at that time.
From the first competition in 1919 and into the 1920s, Rugby League enjoyed great success in Toowoomba. In the local league, Brothers and Valleys traded premierships and were joined in 1922 by future mainstays Newtown. The Rangers club also re-emerged with limited success. On the representative front, Toowoomba had regular matches against the Ipswich and Brisbane club teams. Toowoomba's success in these matches led to them being known as the premier representative side in Queensland. This title was strengthened by strong showings against Sydney premiers Balmain in 1920 and North Sydney in 1921. The 1920 Balmain game was coincidentally scheduled for the same afternoon as the Prince of Wales' visit to the Garden City. A half-day public holiday was announced, although I imagine more than a few locals went to the game instead of seeing the Royals. Toowoomba performed bravely in a loss against England in 1920 and even secured their first international scalp against New Zealand in 1921. The only blip came with a somewhat disappointing tour of North Queensland in 1922, where Toowoomba secured only 2 victories from 7 games. On the playing front, Ed Brown became the first person playing in Toowoomba to represent Australia in Rugby League when he was part of the 1921-22 Kangaroo Tour of Great Britain. By the end of 1923, 6 players from Toowoomba were included in the 19-man Queensland squad. Jack Lemon and Jack Cuneen had earned the elevation to join Gorman, Spencer, Broadfoot and Purcell. In the early 1920s, future champions such as George Ogilvie, Harry Lipke and Matt Herschel were also plying their trade in Toowoomba, alongside established players like Mart Ryan, Lou Mybush and George Hawthorne.
It was remarkable that at the beginning of 1919, Toowoomba didn't have a rugby league competition, and within a few short years they were able to say they were our best team in the world. Now, it didn't suddenly happen in 24. They had a steady progression. In 1923, they were called the best team in Queensland, where I think they lost 1 or 2 games. 22, they had a good year. So every year they seemed to develop, and it was just that they seemed to reach their zenith with the great sides of 24 and 25.
And while in 1923 there was certainly a champion team at the top of the range, hindsight tells us that the real spark for Toowoomba's world-beating success was not yet in town. In fact, in 1923, Toowoomba's X-Factor was leading North Sydney, who in the previous 2 years had won the only 2 premierships ever. Yes, it was fate that would bring the world's best halfback, Duncan Thompson, to Toowoomba. Well, fate, and maybe a stray kick as well.
The Sydney Rugby League considered the case of Duncan Thompson, captain of the North Sydney team, who was ordered off the field in a match against Glebe on Saturday. It was alleged by the touch judge, Hansen, that Thompson had deliberately kicked McGrath of Glebe. After hearing evidence, the committee unanimously decided that Thompson be suspended for the rest of the season.
Now, it should be noted that Duncan Thompson strenuously denied the kicking allegation. In fact, he was so upset at his suspension that he vowed to never play in the Sydney competition ever again. After securing a deal with local publican Ernie Marr, Thompson moved to Toowoomba to open a sports store and, more importantly, play with Valleys. It was a welcome return to the Darling Downs for Warwick-born Thompson, a Queensland and Australian representative halfback considered by some at this time to be the best in the world. Duncan also brought along his brother Colin, a Queensland player in his own right. And the 1924 Toowoomba team was also blessed by the addition of a young forward and New South Wales representative, Vic Armbruster. While the Toowoomba team had had great success in the early 1920s, the addition of the Thompson brothers and Armbruster had an immediate impact. The referee newspaper valorised the team, saying, "The men of Toowoomba have had a season unparalleled in country football." The rep season started against Ipswich in May. After the now customary squabbles over the game's location, the two teams met at the Brisbane Cricket Ground. Amidst wild scenes in the crowd, the game was stopped twice, as the estimated 20,000 spectators tried to find vantage points at the small ground. While mounted police controlled the rowdy patrons, on the field, both Thompson brothers scored and Duncan slotted 3 goals for the 21-11 win. 10 players from Toowoomba then joined the 19-man Queensland squad that travelled to Sydney to defeat New South Wales for the 4th year in a row. Wednesday, 18th of June 1924 should be celebrated as an important milestone for Toowoomba and indeed country sport in Australia. After an exciting game where Toowoomba scored after just 12 seconds, Duncan Thompson led his new side to a 23-20 win over the touring English team.
Thompson's scheme of sheer speed and keeping the ball away from the English forwards being the chief cause of the Toowoomba victory.
It was the first time a country team had ever beaten England. It is hard to imagine the sheer excitement in the town that afternoon. Now, to be fair, Queensland had also beaten England earlier that week, but, as the Brisbane Courier reported, the English captain, Mr. Parkin, thought Toowoomba had played even better than Queensland. The Referee magazine, later reporting on Toowoomba's season, commented that the England team was circumspect about their defeat in the Garden City, admitting they were beaten by the far superior side. In July, Toowoomba proved that the earlier success was no fluke, as they beat Ipswich twice. In Toowoomba, at Athletic Oval, they accounted for their country cousins 31-8, and a week later in Ipswich, Toowoomba came back from an 18-7 halftime deficit to win 33-18. The next challenges were a touring team from Victoria. Firstly, players from Toowoomba were in Queensland's crushing defeat of Victoria 47-20. They then backed up a week later in the Toowoomba team that defeated Victoria by another big score, 47-18. In 1924, Toowoomba had one last assignment to complete an undefeated season. To achieve that record, they would have to beat the full might of New South Wales. Firstly, Toowoomba players Gorman, Spencer, Broadfoot, Armbruster and Jack Purcell were members of the Queensland team that blitzed New South Wales by 36 points to 6. Duncan Thompson was unable to play for Queensland on doctor's orders. Toowoomba remained undefeated for the 1924 season with a 16 points to 0 win over New South Wales. Spencer scored 2 tries and Gorman added 1.
Strange enough, if you read the papers, it was almost that New South Wales expected to be beat by Toowoomba. That such was their reputation, such was their skill. But it's always good to beat New South Wales.
The New South Wales team came, and the scores there were 16-0, which was something in which naturally Toowoomba was very proud to beat us, New South Wales like that.
The Toowoomba public was rightly proud of their men, so proud that some citizens raised money to purchase gold watches as tokens of recognition of the Toowoomba team's unbeaten record in representative matches. A perfect year brings such glory, but it also raises expectations. Undoubtedly, great things were expected of Toowoomba's rugby league players in 1925, because now they were the world's best. The first challenge was keeping the squad together. In a frenzied period reminiscent of more modern times, players were pursued with offers of cash and healthy employment to take their skills to other towns and other clubs. For a time, it looked like Toowoomba's success in 1924 would be their downfall in 1925, as the team seemed likely to split up. Eventually, the TRL stepped in and resolved to pay bonuses to representative players. After much negotiation, most players from 1924 decided to play for Toowoomba in 1925, the only losses being Jack Purcell and Jack Caneen. Duncan Thompson's contract with the TRL stipulated that he was to play for the weakest team in the competition. After guiding Valleys to a premiership in 1924, he was sent to play for Newtown in 1925 as captain coach. Given the outstanding results in 1924, anticipation for 1925 was sky high. The Brisbane sporting public was especially keen to see Toowoomba play when the representative season started on May 2nd at the Brisbane Exhibition Ground. After a tight first half, the men from the Darling Downs ran away with the game, 30-7. Duncan Thompson, Gorman and Armbruster again proved the difference in a team that was inspiring some wonderful pros in the Brisbane Courier.
Toowoomba revealed tricks in ball handling, reverse passing, backing up, uncanny anticipation, and snapped up chances that were worthy of conjurers on the vaudeville stage, rather than of footballers who acquire artistry in their spare time. The machine work was dazzling, the speed bewildering. If it were possible to set football to music, the speed of this Toowoomba side could be adapted to the tempo of a racing pianola or a delirious jazz band.
The next representative match in May saw Toowoomba take on Ipswich at North Ipswich Reserve. In heavy rain, defence was key, as neither side could score more than a try. The game ended with a 3-3 draw, the only match during Toowoomba's unbeaten run where they did not win.
Train travel was very important in the early years of representative football particularly. They would have excursion trains. So if Toowoomba were playing in Ipswich, there would be special trains put on to take spectators to Ipswich, take them to Brisbane, and similarly if Ipswich came up here and if Brisbane came up here, there would be special trains put on for the crowds. And in Toowoomba, there were special trains put on from Pittsworth and Warwick, Dalby, and places to come in and watch the Toowoomba side play in their fixtures against Great Britain or New Zealand and so on.
June 20 saw bucketing rain again, this time in Toowoomba, when Brisbane arrived for a rematch. While it was a wet and muddy affair, Toowoomba unearthed a new star debutant in Roy Lindsay, who scored 3 tries and 2 goals in Toowoomba's 22-3 victory. A week later, Toowoomba hosted their rivals Ipswich. In front of a record-breaking crowd, Toowoomba came from behind to win 18-13. And in the beginning of an almost 50-year competition, the Daily Mail noted that the winner would receive the Bulimba Cup, donated by Queensland Brewery. On July 18, Toowoomba proved that their dominance was no fluke, with a devastating 51-17 victory over Ipswich. The performance must have been a sight to behold, as newspapers of the time enjoyed showering the team with praise.
On the day, there were no Toowoomba stars who stood out. Every man of the 13 starred. There was not one weak link in a well-made chain, and every man fitted in to play his part as if he had been moulded and finished just for his own section of a great machine.
The Sun newspaper had a similar report.
In their game against Ipswich on Saturday, the Toowoomba Rugby League players rose to the heights of genius, both in attack and defence, with Duncan Thompson's display amounting to wizardry. Nothing so spectacular in position finding and effective machine tactics has been ever before seen in the history of the code in Queensland.
During this season, 9 men from Toowoomba were called on for Queensland, who enjoyed a 2-1 series victory over New South Wales. 10 men also played against New Zealand, including the young Roy Lindsay. Controversy arose as Duncan Thompson was overlooked as captain for these games, and his brother Colin omitted altogether for the first match. There was some bad blood over Colin's decision to stay in Toowoomba after previously agreeing to terms with Ipswich. Toowoomba's success was also perhaps inspiring jealousy. New Zealand travelled to the Garden City on August 12 and pushed Toowoomba harder than any other team in this period. Toowoomba was below their best. The team had several players already involved in the Queensland series and lost Ed Brown, their star winger, during the match. Toowoomba hung on 16-14 after enduring a nail-biting finale when New Zealand had the chance to snatch a draw after full time, but failed to convert a late try. In attendance at the New Zealand match were several men from Sydney. They must have watched the game intently, as they were also handy footballers themselves. And surely they were impressed, seeing the team up close, after undoubtedly hearing the stories about this champion Toowoomba team. In fact, these young men were living out a similar story. They were the South Sydney Rabbitohs, the unbeaten premiers from Sydney, in town to challenge Toowoomba for the title of Australia's best rugby league team. South had no intention of playing it safe in the media. Their coach, Mr. Hallett, laid down the gauntlet in the newspaper.
We came to Toowoomba 3 clean days before the match to devote attention to strict training, which has been vigorously carried out. And if we go down, we shall have no complaints. We have prepared for this match as we have prepared for no other. We came to Toowoomba to try to achieve our object of becoming the champion club team of Australia, and we will not hear of being beaten.
The Locals campaign was hindered by the exclusion of Australian representative Ed Brown, who did not recover in time from his injury. Under threatening skies and in front of 6,000 enthusiastic fans, Toowoomba stood tall, winning 12-5. The Truth newspaper didn't mince their words, pronouncing that
Downs champions added the rabbit's fur of South Sydney to the scalps that already hung at their belt.
Once again, the Thompson brothers were singled out for praise, as were Gorman and Spencer. Defeating South Sydney was a crowning achievement for Toowoomba. During the seasons of 1924 and 1925, the Toowoomba representative team was unbeaten in 12 matches against Rugby League's very best teams. They had also unearthed players who had become legends of the game. 6 members of the team, Tom Gorman, Vic Armbruster, Herb Steinhort, Mick Madsen, Duncan Thompson, and Dan Dempsey, would, in 2008, be listed among the 100 top players to play the game in Australia in its first century. 4 players, Steinhort, Thompson, Madsen and Gorman, were also named in Queensland's Team of the Century. There is no one reason for Toowoomba's success in 1924 and 1925. Like the great St George Club of the 1950s, or the champion Queensland team of recent years, Toowoomba benefited from the perfect alchemy of skill, enthusiasm, and most of all, luck. They were lucky the competition in Toowoomba was strong and that there was immense support in the community.
Rugby league was pretty much the only game in town, so if you follow the newspapers, there was great interest from the local community in it. I think they were invested in it. I think you'll find that looking at some of the prominent citizens who took on administrative roles, the chairman of the Toowoomba Rugby League was an important role, and some of the better known people around town got themselves involved. Whenever teams came to visit them, there would be a civic reception, usually put on by the mayor. Large crowds turned up, 4,000 or 5,000 people turned up to watch fixtures. This, of course, is a time before television. This is a time before even radio. So the only way to witness a game would be to turn up. So they were very popular. Took up lots of column inches in all the newspapers, not only in Toowoomba but right across Queensland and also even down in New South Wales. They were very much part of the Toowoomba community, and their success was very much looked forward to and celebrated by the Toowoomba community.
Rugby League was still fairly new in Australia, and in these post-war years, the TRL was given free rein to prosper with the dissolution of rugby union in Toowoomba and Brisbane in the 1920s.
An interesting fact about the Toowoomba Grammar School, of course, was that when rugby union pretty well disappeared off the radar in Queensland from about 1920 to 1928, there was no rugby union. So Toowoomba Grammar, along with Nudgee and all of the other greater public schools, played rugby league for that period of time, and in fact Toowoomba Grammar has a rugby league premiership to its name, which part of this gives a bit of a lie to the whole idea of the amateur status and not being tainted by professionalism as advocated by Mr Barber, the principal of Toowoomba Grammar at the time. When needs must, they found some football for their boys to play.
But a team can only be as good as its players. For this side to include so many future legends is almost unbelievable, though, as is often the case, success bred success. Certainly, these players would not have been so impressive without each other, and not without such strong opposition in Brisbane and Ipswich. In an era before true professionalism, Toowoomba was as valid a place to play as any. These days, however, more lucrative opportunities are in the bigger cities.
In the 1920s, you could play football in Toowoomba. You could have your job here and play here and not have to move on to further your ambitions to represent Queensland or Australia. Young men now, they need to leave here at a fairly early stage to further their career. So we're not even at this stage having young men play a few years of first grade here. They're actually leaving here at 17 or 18 to further their ambitions, and that's we understand that.
If one deciding factor has to be identified, it must surely be Duncan Thompson. His chance arrival heralded Toowoomba's triumphs. Without him, the success would hardly have been so great.
The masterstroke, if you want to call it that, was the good luck that brought Duncan Thompson. He was ahead of his time in terms of coaching and playing, so I think that rubbed off not only on Toowoomba, but rubbed off on Queensland as well. A lot of people say, if you read all the press, that he revolutionised the game. They say he was the first halfback to run with the football, very much about supporting the player. He also had some trick moves, double rounds, things like that hadn't been used before. So he was a very innovative coach.
A supreme athlete in many sports, Thompson's efforts on the rugby league field are even more impressive considering he was permanently wounded in World War I. Thompson later coached Toowoomba to 6 successive Bulimba Cup wins in the 1950s. His revolutionary tactics are said to have transformed the game. Many consider Thompson the father of modern coaching. His influence on rugby league, and especially rugby league in Toowoomba, cannot be overstated. After 1925, the TRL would never reach the same international heights. However, the local league remains one of the strongest in country football and has been the breeding ground for many future superstars, including Steve Price and Jonathan Thurston. The Rangers reformed as a rugby union club and still play locally. The Clydesdales, as the Toowoomba team was later to be known, enjoyed success against Brisbane and Ipswich in the Bulimba Cup until it was disbanded in the 1970s. England toured country areas until the 1980s, and Toowoomba managed a few more hard-fought victories in 1979 and 1984. When a statewide Queensland Cup began in 1996, Toowoomba were the inaugural premiers. They won again in 2001, but were sadly disbanded in 2007. Toowoomba is still represented by local players at the annual 47th Battalion Carnival and by the Western Mustangs in statewide youth competitions. But next time you take a seat at the old Athletic Oval on Arthur Street, the location of so many famous victories, take a moment to remember. From humble beginnings, despite some rocky moments, there was a time, a brief period, when Toowoomba was on top of the rugby league world.
We played England in 1924, which is the most notorious, and the scores were 23-20 in Toowoomba's favour. New Zealand came across, and Toowoomba won by 16-14. Victoria, we defeated by 48 points to 18. At the end of the 1925 season, after we had played the Bulimba Cup, we were then acclaimed, of course, as the champion team of Queensland, and South Sydney, having won the premiership, And with them, I asked Tom McMahon to come, and we were successful by winning by 12 points to 5. That, I feel, is the furthest back I can go in the early days.